For as long as most of us can remember, the entire global order has had one single, unshakable center of gravity, the United States. But something's been happening. Quietly, but very deliberately, the world is starting to rewire itself. So let's dive into this massive shift that's happening right under our noses. So let's talk about Europe for a second. There's this old stereotype, right? You've probably heard it a million times, that Europe is just too divided to get anything done, too comfortable to think strategically, basically just kind of sitting on the sidelines of world events. But if you actually look at what's been happening, especially over the last year or so, you have to ask yourself, does that stereotype still hold up? Because honestly, the evidence is pointing to something completely different. And that brings us to our first big idea here, Europe's quiet shrewdness. It turns out, instead of panicking when faced with some major global disruption, the continent has been playing a surprisingly clever and very effective long game. This quote just nails it. The strategy wasn't about fighting back aggressively, and it definitely wasn't about just giving in. It was about something else entirely. It was about adapting, finding a third way forward. Okay, so how'd they pull it off? Well, it was kind of this brilliant two-step move. First, they resisted and absorbed the shock. When the US hit them with huge tariffs, Europe didn't immediately fire back. They took the hit, which prevented a full-blown global trade war. Then came step two, act and diversify. They used that breathing room they created to go on a global blitz, forging new trade deals everywhere. But look, none of this happened in a vacuum, right? To really get why Europe and the rest of the world started to pivot, you have to look at what triggered it all. A really dramatic and disruptive shift in American policy. And we are not talking about some minor policy change here. No way. This was the US hitting the world with its highest tariffs in almost 100 years. An economic shockwave of that size forces everyone, friends and foes alike, to completely rethink how they do business.
And it wasn't just what was being done, it was how it was being done. Richard Haass, a really respected voice at the Council on Foreign Relations, even called the negotiating style mafia-like talk. I mean, when you hear language like that, you know that the old rules of diplomacy were being completely thrown out the window.
So what you ended up with was this massive split. On one side, you have the US turning inward, focusing on protectionism. And on the other side, you have pretty much the rest of the world looking outward, trying to build more connections and more trade. They were two trains on different tracks, going in opposite directions. And that split, it triggered a huge pivot across the globe. Suddenly, diversification, the old advice about not putting all your eggs in one basket, it went from a smart idea to the absolute #1 survival strategy for countries everywhere. And Europe didn't just talk about it, they acted. Fast. They finally closed a huge trade deal with South America's Mercosur bloc, a deal that had been stuck for 25 years. They smoothed things over with China, calling them a necessary partner. And they put trade talks with Southeast Asia on the fast track. And hey, this wasn't just a European thing. Not at all. Let's look at Canada for a perfect example. For decades, their entire economic strategy was built on one single relationship. More than 3/4 of everything they exported went to one country, the United States. But when your biggest partner becomes unpredictable, that entire model is suddenly at risk. It forced a complete 180. And you have Canada's own foreign minister just saying it out loud, we have to diversify. It's not a choice anymore, it's a necessity. And this isn't just, tweaking things around the edges. The source material calls this a strategic reversal. Think about that. The goal used to be deeper integration with the US. Now the goal is to grow trade with everyone else by 60%. That is a massive, fundamental shift. So, okay, everyone else is diversifying. What does that mean for the US? Well, this is where we get to the real cost of all this, to what some are calling a huge squandered advantage. You see, America's biggest strength, its superpower status, it was never just about its military or the size of its economy. Its greatest, most powerful advantage has always been its incredible network of allies, a coalition that literally controls most of the world's advanced tech, money, and talent. But a network like that, it runs on one thing: trust. And when you start treating your allies less like partners and more like customers, when long-term commitments start to feel more like shakedowns, that trust just evaporates, and you basically force everyone to start looking for other options. And you can actually see this happening in the numbers. In just 2 years, among major rising powers like India, Brazil, and South Africa, the preference for aligning with the US has absolutely plummeted. I mean, those are huge drops. But maybe the most stunning number of all is this one. In a poll across 10 major European countries, only 16% of people still call America an ally. Now, sure, many still see the US as a partner, but that word ally, it means something deeper. It implies a level of trust that, for many, just isn't there anymore. Okay, so where is all of this heading? What's the end game here? Well, it looks like the emergence of a whole new global architecture, one that's being built around the United States, not with it at the center. Think about it like this. For decades, the global system, trade, security, the whole shebang, was built on an American platform. It was the foundation for everything. And let's be clear, that platform, it hasn't vanished. It's still there. The power, the institutions, they still exist. And this is really the key to understanding everything we've talked about. The world isn't building on that platform anymore. They're building around it. They're creating new pathways, new deals, and new partnerships that simply bypass Washington, making America less and less central to their own futures. And that leaves all of us with a really big question. We're watching the world sprint towards a multipolar future, a future with many different centers of power. So, is this it? Is this the new normal? That's the question we all need to be asking as this new world map gets drawn. Thanks for tuning in.